Hello, everybody. We had some major breaking news yesterday that we wanted to, of course, react to. Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia has announced he is not running for re-election. Let's take a listen to what he said.
I've made one of the toughest decisions of my life and decided that I will not be running for re-election to the United States Senate. But what I will be doing is traveling the country and speaking out to see if there is an interest in creating a movement to mobilize the middle and bring Americans together.
So there it is, Krystal. Lots of platitudes, but the top line, he's not running. He is, though, going to be, quote, traveling the country, trying to unite the middle. Will he be running for president on the no labels candidacy? Maybe him and Mitt Romney can team up. You've got two unshackled gentlemen there not running for re-election. It sets up all kinds of interesting possibilities. What did you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is like a horror scenario for the Biden White House because as much as, Manchin is a very conservative Democrat, the most conservative Democrat, made a point of rejecting Biden on any number of initiatives, even ones that were actually popular in the state of West Virginia, things like the child tax credit. But he's still a Democrat. And, their view, the Biden White House, and I think this is accurate and borne out by polling, is that any candidate that would divide the anti-Trump coalition is going to be very bad news for them. And, this is pretty evident when you look at theoretical centrist candidates, who they take more away from. And most of the candidates who are running third party or considering running third party, with the exception of RFK Jr., tend to take more away from Biden than they do Trump, for the simple fact that Trump's support is way more solid and Biden's support is way more squishy. You also have a situation, of course, where perhaps the majority of the country is not too excited about either one of these gents running again. So it makes these potential third-party candidacies that much more potent and that much more of a threat to, certainly to Biden, but possibly also to Trump. With regard to no labels doesn't have any sort of like grassroots constituency. This isn't like a grassroots movement. It is a movement funded by a bunch of very wealthy people who tend to have very sort of like conservative corporate economic politics, and then sort of centristy on social issues tends to be their vibe. So they certainly have the organization and the money to potentially get ballot access in all kinds of places across the country. And Manchin has been the dream candidate for them for some time. So we'll just have to see.
Yeah, that's what people are like, oh, but not that many people are even into a Joe Manchin presidency. I'm like, well, it doesn't matter. And you only need to shave like 2 or 3%. And that's still a huge thing. I also think he would get more, especially if it were like a Romney Manchin type project. The name ID on that alone would make it, and it would just be undeniable in terms of the coverage. And clearly Manchin, has a bone to pick, at least privately, with Biden. He doesn't agree, obviously, with a lot of the things that he's run on. You and I were talking about this previously, but this may seem as if he was being like altruistic, but the main reason he's retiring is he was going to lose. Like, there's almost no question. The state better than I do. Maybe you can lay that out for people.
Yeah, so Manchin, first of all, to go into a little bit of the history, West Virginia for a long time was one of the most solidly Democratic states in the entire country. And it was one of the later states to shift in the sort of southern realignment. Appalachia, West Virginia, and Kentucky in particular were the last to switch. And still at the local level in West Virginia, they elect a heck of a lot of Democrats. So Manchin was the state's governor. He was very popular. Then he runs for Senate and, initially got reelected very easily. And just as politics have become more national, the last time he ran for reelection, actually, his race was much tighter than the polls were showing, much tighter than anticipated. And that was right around the time that all the Brett Kavanaugh stuff happened.
Yep, I remember.
And that's when, things really shifted away from him. Now he manages to hold on. But this time, it wasn't looking like he was going to be able to pull it off again at all. I'd already written the seat off, whether he was going to resign or not. You've got another West Virginia governor, Jim Justice, who was originally a Democrat, switches parties to be a Republican, who is very likely the Republican nominee, and he's very popular in the state. He's a Republican. He's closely associated with Trump. This is a very pro-Trump state. So the writing was already kind of on the wall for Manchin in terms of his political prospects. I also, there's a couple other things to say about that. One is that because the Democratic Party in West Virginia is so sort of moribund, stripped bare of resources, Manchin has really become the Democratic Party in the state of West Virginia. You know, the whole party apparatus is basically designed around him. So it's also sort of a mortal blow to the entire Democratic Party architecture in the state of West Virginia. So there's that, you know, which is interesting on a local level. The other thing to say is, you know, there was a lot of speculation about some of his less popular moves that he made politically, you know, especially with regard to Democratic priorities, things like I mentioned, like the child tax credit, that it's like, oh, well, he's just, you know, he's trying to appeal to West Virginia voters. And I always thought that that was a bit silly because a lot of the things that he would stand against were actually popular in the state. So it didn't really make sense from an electoral perspective. Now, on cultural issues, I think it's a very different thing, but West Virginia is actually pretty economically like populist, which Jim Justice in certain ways has governed that way as governor as well. But so in any case, I think this finally puts to bed the idea that was all just electoral positioning and we needed to leave him alone because he knew the state and he knew what he was doing. Because even with apparently his moves to buck the president, buck his party, it still wasn't nearly enough to overcome the electoral barrier now in a red state of West Virginia.
Yeah, and now the Senate math is particularly tough for Democrats. So I've got it here in front of me. We can put it up there on the screen. To hold the Senate in 2024, Democrats must now defend Montana, Ohio, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, also the White House. If they stumble in just one of those, they must replace one by a GOP-held seat and unseat Tim Scott or Ted Cruz. Good luck, I think, on both of those. What was the last time Jamie Harrison mania? Whenever everyone thought he might have a chance, he ended up losing by 18 points. So maybe they'll have the dream maybe alive once again. But regardless, Krystal, that's a tough map. But I mean, you know, in a sense, his retirement is just indicative of how difficult of a landscape they face. You've got an unpopular president. Politics is literally more national than ever. You know, you can govern in the most Joe Manchin way possible, and that's still, in this day and age, pretty much just not going to get you all that far. I was reading an interesting analysis today that 2018 was one of the biggest retirements from Congress since the post-World War II era in all of history. And one of the reasons is that being a legislator today, senator is a bit different, but we're just talking generally. Being a legislator today, you have never had less impact, as in the committee process is dead. So if you actually want to legislate, you don't have any real input. You can't add amendments. You have no ability to do anything in markup. There's very rarely hearings that are substantive at all in terms of the bill. Leadership controls almost everything. Everything is done through omnibuses, where the giant bills that pass through continuing resolutions, that things just get tacked on at the last minute. It's just the White House and then the leadership in the House and the Senate. They're the only ones that get any input. And then on top of that, your ability to run for office, it has very little to do with what you do all day. It just happens to do with who's at the top of the ticket, like Obama or Biden or Nancy Pelosi. So you could be the best damn legislature there is for West Virginia, but it's a Trump state, and Trump is like the Democrats are the devil, and that's just how a lot of people are going to vote. Now, of course, on the margins, it matters a little bit, but part of the reason we're seeing a mass retirement really at this time is because a lot of these people just don't like the job anymore. They believe that they've never been less effective as legislators.
Well, especially at the federal level, there's just really no ability to be like, you know, a West Virginia Democrat.
Exactly.
Like,
right.
At the end of the day, you're still a Democrat. You're still going to vote for Chuck Schumer. You're still behind Joe Biden. And so we don't really care. And I mean, frankly, I can't really blame voters for that because especially now, you know, once upon a time, it was like, okay, if you had all this seniority, you'd be able to really deliver. You know, Manchin has, I'm sure, put together all sorts of appropriations and quote unquote pork barrel, which oftentimes are really important community projects that actually help places out, and was able to deliver that for West Virginia. But that stuff, you know, is increasingly rare and becomes less and less important over time. So that seniority and that, you know, me, I've been here, I'm looking out for you, no longer matters. And what matters more to people is just like, all right, well, who are you going to vote for majority leader? Who are you going to vote for House Speaker? Who are you backing for president of the United States? That's when we talk about the nationalization of politics, what you see. Now, on the other hand, we just had an example in Kentucky of a Democratic governor who has, you know, been very popular in the state. who was, really tried to hew to the will of the people and focus on things like disaster relief, again, being very present, things like labor issues. He brought a bunch of these new battery jobs into the state. And because it's state and it's not about who you're voting for, House Speaker or Majority Leader or President of the United States, he was able to overcome those trends. But I think in the House and the Senate, it's just, it's becoming increasingly impossible to separate yourself from whatever the partisan lean of your state is. Just to weigh in on the Senate map, obviously it's very difficult. I do think Democrats have a chance to run the table here.
Yes, I agree.
I don't think it's impossible. I saw a while ago some polling out of the state of Montana with John Tester. He's probably the only Democrat who could win in that state, but I do think he has a chance at holding on there. In Ohio, the recent polls have Sherrod Brown actually up by quite a bit. That's the other one that's really tough, and then they got to hang on in a bunch of other swing states. So I don't think it's impossible, but it is very difficult for Democrats. And as I kind of alluded to before, in some ways this clarifies things and also means that they're not going to waste a bunch of money on a West Virginia seat that frankly was probably already gone. So they know exactly what they have to do now in order to hold on to the Senate. This seat was a foregone conclusion, all but, and that's exactly why Manchin has decided to step away.
I think you're right, and also there's a lot of people who are like, "That's it, the Senate is gone." I'm like, really? I heard that before 2020, and then guess what happened? Trump, pulled his shenanigans, 2 special elections, and then they won both seats in Georgia. You never know what's going to happen. You could have a mini blue wave scenario where Biden barely ekes out re-election, but it's like D+4 on the national popular vote. And you would absolutely win Michigan, Pennsylvania, or any of those places. So don't rule out anything. You could also see it the other way. It could be a total red wave, and the Democrats could lose every single one of those seats. Although I think that's probably unlikely. The whole point is that everything is up in the air. The only thing certain right now, Joe Manchin will not be in the United States Senate come 2025. So there you go, everybody. And we will talk about Israel and Palestine next.